Thank you very much, Gail. I know it's weird calling me senator. I find it weird as well sometimes. But I appreciate the invitation to come and speak a little bit about a topic I am very passionate about. So my equity and inclusion story begins as a young teenager when my eyesight began to steadily decline from a progressive eye condition called glaucoma, through which I acquired my disability in my early 20s. At the point where my sight had progressed much too far for it to be saved. As you would expect, my life turned upside down, and I'm still not quite sure if I've found the right way up, to be honest. But I now live as a visually impaired person, and the Kenyan streets just call me VIP for short. I had to start again to accept, to adapt, and learn, relearn, and in disability has proven to me time and time again that it's not the white cane or the wheelchair. It's not the hearing aid or the prosthetic that is the barrier. It's the inaccessible environment around us that is. To understand disability, I want you to remember this equation. An impairment plus a barrier equals disability. Really simple. My impairment plus the environment around me that serves as a barrier, only then do I have a disability. For example, if this entire room was pitch black, all of you would also be disabled because you wouldn't be able to see your seat or find your find your desk or know who's next to you. And therefore, it's the environment which has light in this room that allows you to be non-disabled, right? So let's take visual impairment as another point of reference because research shows that the blind and visually impaired are the most vulnerable road users amongst all disability categories. The white cane, also known as a guide cane, is an important mobility tool for us blind and visually impaired persons. It is recognized as a symbol of safety and independence and respect for the inherent dignity of our community. If we were able to create inclusive streetscapes that fully accommodate the needs of visually impaired road users like myself, we would automatically make Kenya more accessible to every single road user at the same time. Because if I can move safely in the streets of Nairobi as a VIP, that means that all persons with disabilities, as well as you as non-disabled road users, can definitely do the same. And therefore, it's best practice to always design and develop and consider the most vulnerable road users in order to make everybody else above that access roads and transport systems. Article 54 of our Constitution and Article 3 of the principles enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, also speak to our right to freedom of movement. It's an inherent right. It's in the Bill of Rights, freedom to movement. The inclusion of accessibility features for white cane users is also in line with the obligations stipulated under Article 9 of the CRPD on accessibility, Article 20 on mobility, as well as SDGs 10 and 11 on accessible cities and human settlements, etc. And yet, with all of these instruments that should serve as our North Star in the transport sector, because Kenya is a signatory to all of these and more, there is still a lack of regard for visually impaired people, as well as the entire gambit of PWDs in buildings, in the streets, in products, services, and technologies attached to our transport systems, further plummeting our chances at a dignified life. The approximate 8 million people with disabilities in the country had a serious kamkunji this morning, and they've sent me here to tell you the following. For those who don't know what kamkunji means, it's like, I don't know, ask your Kenyan neighbor to explain what a kamkunji is. We had one, okay? 8 million PWDs. And this is what they had to say. Safe movement is an essential condition for the social participation of all, because moving safely is a fundamental and inalienable human right. We are greatly concerned about the safety of our cities for PWDs. Even with all of the extensive knowledge and technologies at our disposal in the transport sector, the reality of inaccessible transport infrastructure continues to enhance our exclusion in society. The development and enforcement of universal design standards across our roads is a must-have, not a nice-to-have. The construction of tactile markers, consistency in working street lights, sonic traffic lights, drop curbs, safe crossing points, a frequency in clear disabled parking slots, and universally designed walkways that facilitate the safe use of disabled users on our roads should be prioritized. Once we do that, it must be put together with the sensitization and training of motorists and non-disabled pedestrians to yield the way of right to PWDs. Remembering that our assistive devices and mobility aids are also a form of NMT, right? Which is never really thought about for all road users and transport authorities to respect. As we strive to be a developed society and participate in the modern world, we must think and be inclusive towards participation of diverse needs of populations in our countries. Apart from being a human right and for every citizen to participate in every endeavors, transport inclusion also symbolizes to the world that we are willing to be counted amongst the socially astute countries amongst the world, so that we can boost investment, we can boost tourism, development, and ultimately we can boost businesses for all of our countries. My advocacy is not just for the good of me alone. My conviction is that a more inclusive and accessible and equal society will lead to better living conditions to us all. Like I said, best practice should always focus on the most vulnerable person in society. I envision a world, a Kenya or an Africa, where we, PWDs, can participate fully in any aspect of life we choose, because we can live up to the same ideals that the rest of the world aspires to, building inclusive, egalitarian societies for us all to enjoy. But of course, we know that standards and manuals, principles, research, policies are nothing without being properly implemented and often remain a polite suggestion. That means that we need ministerial and even presidential buy-in to all that we are here discussing over this conference. Stats show that countries lose up to 7% to 10% of their annual GDP for a lack of inclusion. 7 to 10% is a lot of the annual GDP in all of our countries, but that's what we are losing because we are not fully implementing what should be implemented. In my role as a senator, I'm legislating for the disabled, educating the non-disabled, empowering inclusion champions, and working to influence infrastructure and transport sector policies in Kenya, including drafting amendments to the National Construction Authority Act, the NTSA, that is the National Transport and Safety Authority Act, the Traffic Act, and also the Roads Act, which, by the way, the Roads Act was enacted in the 60s in Kenya and hasn't been overhauled yet. I find that to be incredible. But we are pushing, those of us who are transport savvy and passionate about inclusive and sustainable environments, trying to push for these changes in Parliament. And of course, there's the Road Note 21 that we'll be discussing in the next session that I have also been a part of and researched with a bunch of other consultants on the importance of enhancing mobility of persons with disabilities. But I also want to take this opportunity to say before I close that we need to push the boundaries of all that we're discussing. There's really rich research here, but how is that being channeled to the decision makers in our parliaments, for example, in our ministries? Because we can all sit here and sort of congratulate each other on work well done and research well put together, but if that is not translated or passed on in a very strong way to parliamentarians, to ministers, to PSs, etc., or the equivalent in your countries, then they must they might as well, just be sitting on shelves and collecting dust. So one idea that I have for myself and anyone who's interested to support is creating a parliamentary transport caucus in Parliament. So right now, for example, there's a climate change caucus, which just brings together parliamentarians who are like-minded in terms of climate change and the effects of climate change, and they come together, not divided in terms of parties. It's coming together. It doesn't matter which party you're in, what you believe in, etc. But if you believe in climate change and its importance, then you join the caucus on climate change. I think there needs to be an inclusive transport caucus as well in Parliament, so that people like yourselves can then channel and come and train and come and sensitize and pass on legislative proposals to this caucus, who can then be the champions for that on the floor of the House, if that makes sense. Another suggestion that I'd like to put to you is, in February of every single year, there is something called CSW in New York, which brings together all female parliamentarians across the world into one big UN conference, and they discuss the matters and the issues that are most important to women, especially in all of our countries. And I think that women and transport should be one of the side events or one of the substantive programs or sessions that should be spoken about at the CSW. It's a 2-week-long conference, and it's very influential. Very, very, very. I can't emphasize that enough. So how can we come together through this conference to put in some kind of a paper, to request for a session to talk about women and transport, and then put together all this research and create an environment where all these women parliamentarians from across the world can go back to their countries and implement, because it's important enough and it underscores the welfare of women across the world. So in closing, I know what it's like to be invisible, to be lost in statistics. Part of it has been a discriminatory society and discouraged spirit. But majority of it has been in the hands of folks responsible for the design, development, delivery, and decision-making in the transport environment. The Disability Fraternity was very happy to hear that I was invited here today, because it displays a willingness to listen and give us a seat at the table. I beseech you not to remain a transport industry, but turn yourself into an inclusive transport industry, not just for women and girls, but for all vulnerable road users. I thank you.